Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic.
I'm Barry P. Cook. I'm here to talk to you about the season 3 and series finale of Star Trek Picard. It was called The Last Generation. And as the episode began, we heard an address going out across the fleet, all over Earth and elsewhere, being made by the president of the United Federation of Planets, Anton Chekhov, presumably a descendant of Pavel Chekhov, as voiced by Walter frickin' Koenig, which is totally awesome. And during that speech, he says that his father says there are always possibilities, which is something Spock said, which one assumes got passed down to him as something overheard by Pavel. Well, anyway, very cool voice cameo. Interestingly, the message very closely resembles the message that the Federation president at the time sent out when the space probe was looking for the whales on Earth at the beginning of Star Trek 4, or the early part of Star Trek 4. It was very similar to that message. Anyway, after realizing that the Borg cube is at Jupiter, Picard orders the ship to go there. But he orders it to warp there, which was interesting because, as far as I know, you're not supposed to warp within the Sol solar system. So unless they were just outside of it, it wasn't supposed to do that. Anyway, it turns out that the Borg opened a transwarp conduit inside the gases of the planet Jupiter, where they're hiding the cube. And it looked to me like there was like a Borg city coming out of various parts of the cube, like structures extending outwardly from the cube surface on various surfaces. It's very strange. We'd never seen that before. Anyway, the Borg assault on Space Dock continues with the Federation fleet assembled in a row of Borg characters, if I'm not mistaken, which is something nobody's brought up, as Seven and some of the others try to retake the Titan, which they managed to do. They managed to get on the bridge, and they hit the Borg officers there with phasers that apparently had been modified to shoot transporter beams, which is very cool. Seven mentioned something about, we've invented the transporter beam gun, which is cool. And it sent the assimilated bridge crew into transporter room 1, where they were locked behind a door. But Seven and the remaining crew still have to disconnect the Titan from the rest of the fleet, which Seven thinks they can do before the Borg figure out that it's been retaken. But I was a little dubious about that, because if the Borg have a hive mind, a true hive mind, then they would share information from ship to ship, and they would automatically, immediately know that the ship had been retaken. But anyway, the cube lowers its shields and aims its weapons away from the Enterprise D as a sort of invitation. So Picard goes over the cube with Riker and Worf after Worf says, because Picard says he's going, Riker says he's not going alone. So Worf says, I'll make it a threesome. And Riker goes, do you even hear yourself? Which is very funny. But of course, they're going there to try to locate Jack, because they have to stop the signal, which apparently he is sending. And Picard leaves Jordy in command, which is interesting because Data used to be the second officer, and he would be put in command if Riker and Picard both left the ship, not like on the original series where it always fell to the chief engineer, who was Scotty. Scotty was the second officer. In this case, of the Enterprise D, when it was originally in service, Data was the second officer, so I was a little confused by that. But then I thought, well, he's been onto the loop a while. Maybe Picard thought it was best to give it to Jordy, especially since Jordy knew more intimately what the Enterprise D was capable of at that particular moment than Data did. Anyway, the first thing they come across on the cube is a Borg corpse, the body of which was being cannibalized for some purpose, and then they found a bunch more bodies in the same state. Picard then has a poignant departure from Riker and Worf as he goes off to find Jack, saying now he has to be a father, and he exchanges sentiments with them about, how honored he's been to serve with them and so forth. It was really cool. And then Worf and Riker go to find a beacon, I guess, that is part of sending out the signal. I wasn't really clear on that. But in this scene, we also find out that Picard, who's cybernetic now, is still somehow in tune with the collective. I didn't really understand that, but that's the case apparently. Anyway, he soon does indeed come across Jack, who's been completely Borgified. He's got the thing on his face and he's in the black suit and all that stuff. And he can be heard giving the standard Borg greeting to Earth. Picard starts trying to communicate with Jack, at which point the Queen shows up, but she's not looking too good, existing only as a torso directly connected to the ship, like with no lower body. Aboard the Titan, they detect the Enterprise on the field, which I didn't think made immediate sense because I didn't think it would have been transponding because it wasn't part of the collective fleet. But I guess its regular transponder would have been in use and the Titan would have been able to pick that up. Anyway, Seven decides to give the Enterprise the time it needs to try to take out the cube, which she surmises it's trying to do. Picard offers himself to the Queen, but she doesn't want him and says that it isn't about assimilation anymore, but rather evolution and propagation. The Titan makes a crazy run at the fleet, firing in all directions after, I think, having taken down their shields with all of the various prefix codes. Meanwhile, the assimilated crew breaks out of the transporter room. Worf and Riker come under attack by a couple of drones as the cube starts firing on Enterprise. Enterprise fires on the cube's weapon systems, with Beverly pushing the buttons quite well, actually, and then explaining that a lot's happened to her over the last 20 years where she's gained this experience, which was very cool. Riker takes out the two drones with a phaser hidden in the hilt of Worf's bat'leth, which there was a funny moment over. Data, meanwhile, goes with his gut, which tells him that he can navigate the Enterprise inside the cube through a crazy labyrinth of twists and turns in order to get to the core, a la the trench run in Star Wars, and though he's reluctant to, Jordy goes along with it. Space dock then falls and planetary shields go down, at which point the fleet targets every major population center on Earth. The assimilated crew on the Titan destroys the cloaking device, exposing the Titan to the fleet. Picard disconnects Jack from the collective manually, risking totally messing up his mind. The Enterprise crew realizes that destroying the beacon will destroy the cube and kill their crew members as well as Jack. At this point, Riker and Worf decline to be beamed away because they need to help Picard, who voluntarily assimilates himself so that he can reach Jack, who seems to be enjoying being connected. Picard tells Jack that he's part of him, a part he never knew he was missing, which would have been cool except for the part that Picard did know he was missing: family. We know this from Generations. But anyway, Jack insists that he's happy where he is and he's happy being there. Jordy orders the beacon destroyed with tears in his eyes, and both Beverly and Deanna are also visibly upset. Then the Enterprise flees the scene. Picard tells Jack he's going to stay with him if Jack won't leave. As they embrace, Jack has some flashbacks of recent events with his folks, and then seems to come out of it, disconnecting himself from the apparatus, as Picard does likewise with his help. Riker reaches out to Troy sort of mentally. He verbalizes his love for her, and she senses him and then immediately knows where in the cube they are, and she takes over the helm, which was both cool and terrifying at the same time because the last time she flew the Enterprise, she crashed it. Kind of. But this time she's able to put the Enterprise directly over the position where her crewmates and Jack are, inside the cube over an open area of it, and she beams everybody up. The assimilated crew breaks back onto the Titan bridge, but as the cube goes up, the assimilation abates. Riker then gives a captain's log as captain of the Titan, which I guess happened in the wake of fending off the catastrophe, as did, it would seem, Beverly's promotion to admiral and the head of Starfleet Medical, a position in which she managed to figure out how to remove the corrupted DNA from everyone's system using transporters, which now also can scan for changelings, which is cool. It turns out that the changelings didn't kill most of the people that they replaced when they infiltrated Starfleet, meaning that TUVOK is still alive. And we see him give Seven a bit of a dressing down, but then he gives her a hologram from Shaw, giving her review in which he recommended her for promotion to captain, whereupon TUVOK denies her immediately prior offered resignation, calling her captain. Rafi's family reaches out to her and wants to establish a connection after Worf secretly, but not so secretly, leaked all of her top secret accommodations and accomplishments to the public from her record. We then see that Data is attending what would seem to be one of his daily counseling sessions with Counselor Troy, which was kind of interesting. And he says that actually being human is almost as difficult as having wanted to be human before when he couldn't or wasn't, which is interesting. Then we cut to a year later at the Fleet Museum, where the Enterprise D finds itself being exhibited after, I guess, having been completely restored in the meantime from its almost fully restored state that it was in when they first took it out last episode. We find that Jack is a Starfleet ensign after just a year, somehow, nepotism, and that he's getting posted already. And it turns out that they renamed the Titan the Enterprise G, and this was depicted in a sort of emotional moment, which I thought was leading to them showing that the ship had been named the USS Jean-Luc Picard, which would have been so cool. I would have lost my shit. But they didn't do that. They named it the Enterprise, which is cool enough. And it, of course, follows tradition. We see that Seven is in command with Rafi as first officer, and that they're about to take the Enterprise G on a shakedown cruise, which I don't get because it's still the Titan, but I guess maybe it's been refit after some damage, so they're going to do a shakedown cruise. And Seven appoints Ensign Jack Crusher as special counselor to the captain, which I thought was a little weird, but okay. 709 then orders the ship to warp to begin her legacy, in Jack's words, but we don't get to see what her catchphrase is. They cut right before she says a catchphrase or a phrase. Our favorite crew is closing down Guinan's 10 forward on Earth, and Picard offers a toast with a pretty long quote from Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare. Before they all decide to play poker, and the season and the series ends with the exact same spiral out overhead shot as the final shot of the 7th season of TNG, which was very, very cool. But wait, there's more. There's a mid-credit scene where Jack is setting up his quarters aboard the Enterprise and is visited by goddamn Q, who says that the only reason he's perceived as having died by humans is because they think so linearly, which was pretty cool. He then further says that the trial of humanity is over, but he's holding a trial for Jack specifically. And that's where the episode and the season and the series ended. So I really enjoyed this episode. I was concerned that they weren't going to be able to wrap it up, that it would seem Deus Ex Machina. And, you know, there is an argument to be made that it was Deus Ex Machina because, of course, once they destroyed the beacon, all the assimilated people stopped being assimilated, right? They didn't have to then still continue to fight the assimilated crew members. So it was kind of Deus Ex Machina in that sense. And of course, you know, in the past, they say that directly severing the connection, and they say it even in this episode, between the hive mind and the Borg could mess them up. But I guess they had no choice but to destroy the beacon, and the side effect was that everybody became unassimilated. And, you know, it was what it was. But, you know, we've known forever that the Borg operate partially by taking things over by means of signals and not only a physical presence where they jack into stuff. So that was fine. And there was no way they weren't going to blow up the cube anyway. Obviously, they're going to blow up the cube, right? Just for that moment of television where the cube goes boom. So we knew that was going to happen anyway. So some of the Deus Ex Machina was just unavoidable. In terms of the season, I think the finale episode, I think, you know, it can be argued that in terms of the whole season, this episode did wrap things up too quickly because they spent 9 episodes getting to the point where the bad guy's hand was fully revealed and implemented, and then an hour resolving it. But I think the saving grace there is that also over those 9 episodes, they know what the bad guy plot is, and they're pursuing trying to prevent it from being implemented, only to fail, and then having to undo it. So I think it works that way. And, you know, this episode and the previous one felt like a really solid 2-part Next Gen episode where the heroes have to fend off an attack by the Borg against humanity, which, when it comes to the best of both worlds, started at the beginning of one episode and ended at the end of another. So, how is this different? It's not. So, it still works. I was concerned that the use of the Enterprise would feel overly nostalgic and silly, but it actually didn't. I mean, with the scenario of the whole fleet being taken over by the Borg, they had to come up with some way to attack the assimilated fleet with another ship. And of course, that ship would have to be disconnected from the fleet or it wouldn't work. So the fact that it happened to be the Enterprise is a tiny bit fan fictiony, but given that in the end they just retired the ship to the museum again and didn't do something crazy like go off on adventures in it, I think it worked for what it was. And I'm glad for that because I was concerned that it was going to be silly, and it ended up not being silly. I thought that they managed to make the Borg or maintain the scariness of the Borg by virtue of the whole thing where the Queen says, "Oh, we're not interested in assimilation anymore, in taking people over that already exist. We're interested in evolving and becoming something more threatening. And part of the way we're going to do that is by propagation. In other words, making new Borg the old fashioned way, biologically, through biologically enhanced people who have it in their very DNA." So I thought that was pretty scary. And we needed that, in order for the Borg not to be tired and boring. I thought that just as was the case across the whole season, the character stuff that they did in this episode, was great. It continued to be great. Worf, Troy, Crusher, Riker, Picard, Jordy, Data, all of them got their due. And we saw that they had grown as people. They grow as people, they grew as people not only in the intervening years that we didn't see them, but over the course of this season, which I thought was great. I was very happy about that for the actors in particular, because that kind of thing is an actor's dream, to play a character that changes and grows over time, that doesn't stay stagnant. That so I'm sure they were thrilled about that, and I was happy for them in that regard. The actors, of course, were phenomenal in their parts the whole way through. Jerry Ryan was fantastic, which is not a surprise. She's awesome. The guy that plays Jack, he did an excellent job the whole season through, and in the finale, he was excellent. I enjoyed the part where Picard says, "Look, if you're not leaving, I'm staying with you." I thought that was very cool and very much Jean-Luc. I just wish they hadn't had him say, "You're my actual family that I never knew I was missing." Because we know that he did know he was missing real family, especially once his brother and nephew died. So I wish they hadn't messed that particular thing up. But other than that, it was excellent. I mean, a much, much better ending to the Next Gen story than was Nemesis on multiple fronts. You very much get the sense that all of the characters are okay and are just going to move forward. And, that's such a stark difference from where we left the crew at the end of Nemesis. They were sad and sort of beaten down, and Data was dead, and it just wasn't great. But where they leave the characters at the end here is an excellent ending for these characters, assuming that it is. I have a feeling we haven't seen the last of Worf, Riker, maybe Jordy. So we'll have to see. But anyway, if we don't, I think this left them all in an excellent place. I think it left the Star Trek universe in a good place, where Starfleet now can prevent against changelings infiltrating the fleet again. And Seven is a captain. They redeemed Rafi, who in the first 2 seasons was a terrible character. They made her into a really good character this season, and they even redeemed her personal story, which I thought was fantastic, because I'm for that kind of thing, happy endings, as it were, redemption. I love that stuff. So I was glad about that. They could easily have forgotten to do it, but they didn't. We saw that Worf and Rafi are really good friends now, which I think is great because she needs friends. And, Worf is kind of a stoic guy, but he really connected with Rafi. And I think that's great for him. And look, I can't tell you where it exactly started, but there's a hashtag legacy or hashtag Star Trek legacy thing out there on the Twitterverse. And Terry Matalas at one point chimed in and said that if he were to continue with a new show from this point, it would be called Star Trek Legacy. I don't think he came up with the term, but I can't say he didn't for sure. But anyway, somewhere out there in the webosphere, the hashtag Star Trek Legacy, the concept of Star Trek Legacy came up, and it would be a series that continued the adventures of the crew of the Titan, now the Enterprise G, to include Seven of Nine and Jordy's daughter. And at this point, Rafi, and originally Captain Shaw before he died, which from the beginning I thought was a great concept, and which I now even more think is a great concept, given that the ship is now called the Enterprise, and Seven is in command, and Jack is there. Again, I think he's a great character, and Rafi is there, and Jordy's daughter is there, one of them, and he says, "This is the start of your legacy." When she warps off, when she warps out the ship. I really could get behind that, especially given they figured out a way to bring John Delancey back at the end to say, "Ha ha ha ha, I'm not done." I would love to see a Star Trek Legacy series focusing on the adventures of the Enterprise G with Seven, Rafi, Jack, and Q, and Geordi's daughter. And we can only all cross our fingers that it gets made, with the caveat that we would want Terry Matalas or someone of the same mind as him running it versus the idiots who've been running Discovery for 5 seasons and who ran Picard for the first 2 seasons. But that's really it. That's the end of Star Trek Picard Season 3 and Star Trek Picard the series, and possibly the beginning of a show focusing on the Enterprise G, which may or may not be called Star Trek Legacy. Fingers crossed. I'm going to get out of here. I'll be back to review Star Trek in the future because Season 2 of Strange New Worlds is right around the corner. And we still, of course, have more Lower Decks and Prodigy coming. But for now, I'm going to take my leave. And until I return, I wish you peace and long life.